Loki is probably the most depressing story to come out of Warframe, if not one of the most depressing stories. Many folks have got a lot of opinions regarding how damage has overtaken a lot of the Warframe meta and strategies, and to some extent, while there is a sense of objectivity in that observation, a lot of it comes up to feelings, right? And there's nothing like necessarily wrong with that, but it's about feelings of difficulty, balance, and game design. People pretend their opinions are facts, and they're just not, but it's okay, you can still argue with opinions. I can have that literal discussion, I can have the discussion for literally hours, and maybe at some point I will, but that's not for now. Anyway, thank you guys for the support with the last video. Love you guys to death. Hopefully you're doing well into the new year. We're talking a Loki rework today. Let's get started. So Loki's design isn't really bad, not at all. It's just a little outdated. He's lost so much of what made him useful. Content gets added to the game. It wants damage. Loki doesn't have that part. Mobility is pretty neat, but Titania, Gauss, Volt, they all exist, right? And even like non-speedster frames like Nova, you know, they can outpace him. His strength was once the ability to move around and disrupt really actively, properly. A very like active Valmon kind of, right? His invisibility made him really difficult to kill, so he could disrupt safely. You layer that with safeguard switch, and he's basically an unkillable support, which is a very novel and cool concept. All these things have lost their value or have gotten power crept into oblivion. Damage is king, and you know, support frames, the bar, Wisp, Oberon, stuff like that, you know, Dante, the bar is pretty high when you're talking about support, and CC frames are having a rough time as it is with Overguard and whatnot. But in case you guys weren't here for the Chroma rework, which you should totally go watch after this one if you haven't seen that, but a couple of notes with my reworks. Couple of, like, I guess, disclaimers, sort of. My goal is basically always to keep in theme of what Digital Extremes intended, unless I truly believe a certain ability, mechanic, or concept is totally unsalvageable, which is not very often at all. Or if I believe my idea is so awesome, I'll want to share anyways. Sometimes I'll share my own idea that's completely novel, along with something that's more reworked from DE's work, but usually I'll include things that didn't make it to my final concept, because otherwise they're going to be on the cutting room floor, and I've got some, like, pretty okay ideas, I guess, right? Numbers are basically always arbitrary, but do have some sort of meaning and usually thought put into them. I tend to write these reworks with nearly the strongest version of them that I can conceive. My main aim is a proof of concept, so not everything is totally refined and complete with absolution. Game devs who collect paychecks to do this stuff don't have everything done on the first try. That's what playtesters are for. I rely on the comments and future revisions to shed any extra fat and create something more balanced and complete. So if you're gonna throw rocks through my window in the comments, throw you some solutions as well. This last disclaimer doesn't apply to all rework videos, but remember that I'm not just meeting Loki, the Warframe, where he's at. I'm also meeting the game Warframe, where it's at. And if damage or something that Loki wasn't really made for is part of the meta and a frame is outdated, I do have to keep that in mind. I understand that Loki's design, you know, with Oberon, he was a bad support, and they made him a good support because support is something that's still valuable. What Loki provides, that is part of not a Loki problem exclusively, but also a huge, colossal Warframe problem. And again, whether that's a problem or not is some parts objective, but a lot of parts feelings. So there will be some feelings in this video, but the rework today, again, I'm just including a lot of stuff here for Loki players to bite on. I know that Loki, it's a very controversial topic, and the Loki master race will probably send a undisclosed explosive device to my house, but we'll figure it out. I'm gonna put it out there anyway, and let's get started. Don't forget to like, sub, all that. Thank you for the likes, subs, hypes, everything. Love you guys to death, and let's get started. So where is Loki left today? His passive is it's a wall latch for 10 times the amount of time. Good stuff. Damage decoy is the only thing that keeps decoy intact, but honestly it's one of the best of the designed augments in the game from both like a practical and conceptual point of view. So I do love damage decoy to death. Invisibility is simple and effective, but it's really simple and doesn't provide enough for modern Warframe in my view, based on the standards applied by new frames. Switch teleport's pretty cool conceptually, but it's also very defined by its augment, safeguard switch. That is the main reason you use that ability at all. So that's a problem, I would say, but we're going to tackle that. But it is a pretty reliable source of invincibility, I would say. A little bit of activity required, but it's solid. Every Loki Master Race defender brings up the fact that Loki's immortal, and it's pretty annoying because that's really all he does outside of damage decoy. And that argument does not apply to Revenant. Revenant does more. Don't be annoying. You're putting a lot of effort in for a worse version of a lot of frames, and radial disarm is just not really useful at all. Even with radiating disarm makes it a little bit better, but as far as I know, it's only 1 stack of radiation, which is just not great. I asked Loki players on the tier list if they felt any kind of connection to Loki's ultimate, and they basically every single one said no. So what are some approaches we can rework? I'm gonna tell you right now, I did some insane shit for his ultimate. But luckily for the rest of his kit, his first 3 abilities and passive, I kept it pretty simple. So let's get started. So I've got some pretty good ideas. My direction is kind of something that moves around like deception, finishers, utility, mobility, but also throwing in a little bit more damage into his kit so he can be more up to date. But his ultimate is really where I've innovated quite a bit. So Loki's passive is so horrendously ass that almost anything would be better. So my passive idea is a bit unique, but it's also not completely crazy in my view. Basically, as Loki remains undamaged, he gains buffs to his stats, indicated by a meter in the bottom right hand, similar to Garuda's passive, which is that damage meter in the bottom there. At 15 seconds, Loki gains 20% parkour velocity. At 30 seconds of being undamaged, Loki gains plus 15% ability efficiency. At 45 seconds of remaining undamaged, 15% ability duration, and at 1 minute, all of those stats are doubled. So at 1 minute of being completely untouched, Loki gains plus 20% parkour velocity, or plus 40% parkour velocity, plus 30% ability efficiency, and plus 30% ability duration. I think that's a pretty respectable passive, and it kind of falls in line with Loki's kit in my view. It gives you more options for modding because you get more duration and more efficiency in there, and also the parkour velocity is something I think a Loki will always want for the kind of content that he is good for. Decoy I'm keeping relatively similar. Its problem right now is that it just relies on damage decoy, and for this, just disclosure, I'm keeping damage decoy basically exactly the same, but I'll go over the rework first. So decoy operates similarly. A decoy is placed, but now it's invulnerable, attracting enemy aggression as it always does. I think that scaling with it is always going to be a problem. It does a pretty good job, but in my opinion, keeping it invulnerable is the way to go. If you have an argument against that, I could see that. The way it works currently, it usually seems to be quite durable. When Loki places a new decoy or recasts, I haven't really decided. I think I'm going to have it be recast, but those abilities can be kind of finicky. I haven't decided on technicality, but basically, when Loki recasts his decoy, it detonates, stripping enemies of their overguard within 15 meters and blinding those enemies as well, opening them up to finishers. Basically, this is a remote radial blind that also strips off overguard. I think for a CC, a frame who is reliant on some CC, I think that the ability to take overguard off is just really cool. I debated giving it a proper armor/shield strip, but I feel like that seems quite overtuned. But again, I'm including it here because I thought it could be a fine idea. I think Loki's unique ability to like screw over overguard with this ability and blind the enemies who have overguard anyway, I think is quite strong. And again, damage decoy stays the exact same. Moving over to invisibility. It's a fine ability. It does its job really well, to be honest. But with where Warframe is at right now, I would like to tag a little bit more onto it. So we're tagging 2 things onto it and also making hushed invisibility base kit. I'll get to that in a second because obviously I have to replace it with another augment. So Loki gains a critical damage buff while under invisibility. This critical damage buff is doubled for daggers. This takes inspiration from Cyto 9's resupply bonus damage, except it's just critical damage. It's made a little bit more specific, and it's also, again, like Sights is buffed for snipers and doubled. In this case, it is doubled for daggers. This part is the second part of invisibility, which I would normally build this part into decoy, but decoy is Loki's subsume. I get you can take parts out of abilities for helmet purposes, but I think it's just cleaner this way. When Loki performs a melee finisher while under invisibility, 3 other clones of Loki will appear around enemies within 10 meters, copying the finisher. If the enemy is blinded, the effect is replicated once more, concluding in 12 total clones performing finishers at maximum. So what do we understand from this? What Loki would do is he would send out his decoy, detonate it, all those enemies are blind, performs a finisher, and then at that case, 12 total Lokis. I guess this says 12 total clones in my script, but it'll be 12 total Lokis performing the finishers. This is a way to kind of make finishers quite strong, except not in the way of old Marked for Death, which would just one-shot entire radius, radii or whatever. In this case, you can basically get 12 kills within one finisher animation, provided they're all blinded by your decoy. I think finishers are very underrepresented for how cool they are in Warframe, and I think this is a great way to get them in there. And of course, you only get 3 clones if the enemies are not blinded, so you're forced to use that synergy in order to assassinate more enemies. likewise. So yeah, give me your guys' thoughts on that. I think it's really cool. Again, basically, Loki, when he performs a finisher, he creates 3 other Lokis that perform finishers on other targets, and if those targets are blinded, the effect will happen again, allowing 3 more from each, 3 Loki clones, concluding in 12 total clones performing the finishers. This is, again, just a cool way to get finishers out there and moving, and I think it's something unique for Loki to do, right? Likewise, I replaced Hushed Invisibility. I've made a base kit because there's no reason it shouldn't be. It's been replaced with a new augment called Invisible Hand. Teammates that Loki switch teleports with gain his invisibility and crit damage buff for the remaining duration. I'm not going to say that's an amazing augment because it really isn't, but I think that it could totally work in some situations. Let's move on to Switch Teleport. Switch Teleport is really only good for its augment, so I'm centering the ability around it. Safeguard Switch is now base kit, and we're going to add a new augment at the end of this discussion real quick, but in addition to some buffs. So Loki gains half of the invincibility regardless of if he swaps with an enemy or ally. In the current version of Loki, if he switches with an ally, the ally gets a doubled invincibility compared to Loki if he were to switch with an enemy. In this case, no matter who Loki switches with, he gets that invulnerability, but allies always get it doubled, along with the status cleanse, which it normally does currently. Downed enemies will instantly be resurrected with the invincibility tagged on. When swapping with an enemy, they are fully stripped of their defenses and given a damage vulnerability debuff. Enemies will gain aggro to the swapped comrade like they do currently, and I think that the damage vulnerability would make it so the person that Loki swapped with is basically instantly killed, ideally. This would make sense because the enemies are shooting at Loki and he swaps out. In their head, it's like, oh, Loki switched and the enemies were still shooting. So instead of shooting Loki, then they shoot their friend and he dies. I think thematically that makes a lot of sense. It won't always be executed that way, but I think to me it makes perfect sense. It would also give it a counter to overguarded units. Having their overguard stripped could be great. It'll be really good for getting rid of priority targets, which could be really cool. Loki could switch teleport with an Xmas unit, all their defenses are gone, and pop them with a Vasto or whatever. Could be super cool. I thought about having it silence enemies too, to take out acolytes, but I feel like that's just a whole lot. Plus Banshee doesn't need more taken from her, I don't think. It feels like a single target ability, so I think it'd be really cool. If he swaps with the decoy shatters to blind enemies like usual and leaves the decoy behind, not destroying it, just so it can be used again. So with this, we could create a very effective blind synergy with Switch Teleport. Safeguard Switched is replaced with a really funky new augment it's very experimental. I'm calling it Escape Switch. Loki can now hold cast Switch Teleport, causing him to teleport to his decoy no matter where it was placed. This would allow Loki to traverse insane distances and complete certain objectives with absurd efficiency. Think getting the Narmer Veils off of the Deacons, or what's an example? There are quite a few objectives where you are traversing an insane amount of space, and with Loki being able to, basically teleport, effectively like Protea recall, back to his decoy, I think this could be a really innovative way to create content where mobility, the ability to teleport like that would be super valuable. I think there's pieces of content where you'd want that, and giving Loki an accessible, easy way to do it is something I think Loki players would want. So yeah, basically, Escape Switch, Loki can now hold cast Switch Teleport, causing him to teleport to his decoy no matter where it was placed. Loki's ultimate is, it's pretty buns, especially given Warframe's current environment. I have a lot of personal bias and thoughts in this one, but I'll disclose that in a second. I surveyed a lot of Loki players, both in my personal community and in my YouTube community, and most mentioned that it is the part of their kit they feel the least connected to. It really is the helm of the slot in most builds. You don't want to give up damage decoy because it's very strong with stuff like impetus. You don't want to, in priming especially, you don't want to give up safeguard switch, and obviously you're not going to give up invisibility. That gives up a decent amount of comfort and crepuscular as well if you decide to use that. Disarming enemies is nearly useless, especially when you are the frame that is invisible and invincible, right? Title card. And most of your teammates will have plenty of means of protecting themselves nowadays. It's just not as valuable of a support concept. My only thought would be to pivot more in the direction of a radiating disarm, giving enemies damage vulnerability, having them outright kill each other with increased speed and aggression, similar to Nova's Molecular Prime. I just personally, again, opinion, I don't like the majority of mechanics from Warframe that rely on the AI for outcomes, right? Whether that's companions or summons or enemies killing each other like that. For me, the inconsistency really bothers me, and it requires a whole lot of work to make work, or it's just straight up uninteractive. So for me, even though I understand that turning enemies against each other is kind of Loki's thing, I think that whole premise, especially in Modern Warframe, whether it's because it would be too boring and too uninteractive, and I'm sure it's possible to make something that's interactive that works and is fun. It's just a lot of effort, right? But it's possible. I just have a personal bias against it. So would it be cool to have enemies just outright slime each other out? Yeah, it'd be pretty cool. Having something that gives increased speed and aggression could be pretty cool. Giving Nova a little bit of competition there wouldn't kill. But for me, I've decided to make a bonkers new ultimate that would probably require a good bit of work to implement. But overall, I think it's very on theme with Loki and has potential to make Loki uniquely powerful in a world where we're running out of like really cool concepts. I think this is one of the coolest concepts that's been kind of unexplored by DE. I am presenting to you Loki's new ultimate called Illusions of War. And before I go like super in depth with the ability, I understand that some Helminth-esque like restrictions would probably have to be placed on this, or some sort of balance something. But I think a concept like this is totally plausible and possible to be introduced into the game. So I understand it would be very strong, but again, that's how these reworks are released, and there would have to be adjustments made in terms of the kind of warframes and abilities that could be used here. But I still think this is something totally worth exploring. Thank you for your patience. The ultimate begins in Loki's arsenal, where he can equip 3 different warframes, kind of as exalted weapons. These are called Loki's imperfect illusions, and they're moddable. However, imperfect illusions are not limited by numerical mod capacity, but instead have only 4 mod slots. I was in between 3 or 4 on this one, but I settled with 4 for now. I'm not sure why, but whatever. These could have moddable appearances, I guess, but I don't really care. I would just like whatever frame you choose. It would have like some signs of decay, parts ghosted out or withering, indicating that they are not at full strength. Loki is mimicking them, but not in a complete sense, right? He's not perfect at it, hence the name Imperfect Illusions. In Mission, when Loki presses the 4 ability key, whatever that might be, for Illusions of War, his abilities switch to icons of the chosen Warframe's ultimates. Selecting that ability will change Loki into the Warframe selected and build he previously equipped. Loki can remain as the Warframe for up to X amount of time, scaling with duration, and performing a backflip will exit the disguise early. That Warframe then goes on a cooldown, scaling with a base amount, along with the time spent as the disguise. Any duration-based buffs, summons, debuffs, whatever, remain with Loki for their given duration, even after exiting the Illusions of War disguise. Invisibility and switch teleport's invulnerability remain when swapping into disguises. This is mainly for the purpose of keeping Loki's new passive up. If you wanted to use an ability like Iron Skin from Rhino, obviously you'd want enemies to be able to shoot you, so at that point, just manage that properly, right? I thought about freezing the protection and invis duration while in the disguise, but again, that could interfere with an ability that makes you want to take damage. Obviously this ability is a lot. This is a lot. I don't get paychecks to sit here and balance every single interaction. It would be crazy. Obviously, I don't want channeled abilities to transfer. They could last indefinitely pretty easily. I thought about giving them a duration that would last after Loki exits the disguise, or giving every ability a duration. But that seems like a whole lot of work. It seems kind of annoying to do. But basically, the idea is that Loki would have a fairly simple assassin/utility base kit, but then could expand his kit in any which way, whether that's equipping 3 support illusions, damage illusions, or literally anything in between or around. I feel like this is something the average Loki player would really enjoy. The further mod slot restriction aims to ensure that none of Loki's clones can become close to the real Warframe strength, especially because he would have access to so many abilities this way. Most buff durations, due to the way I've balanced it, wouldn't allow Loki to get a disgusting setup with 3 sets of Warframe buffs, but probably 2. But still two sets of Warframes plus Loki himself, Loki and his own buffs. That's still a fairly intriguing, way to get some sort of setup going. Again, I want to emphasize, I understand restrictions would have to definitely be placed on an ability like this, but I totally think the concept is still absolutely worth looking into. Just want to repeat myself, just don't go crazy in the comments, or do it, I guess, it boosts engagement, whatever. Knock yourself out, man. Right? So, I don't know, imagine you swap into Dante, cast his his Word Warden, his Page Flight, and his Triumph, swap into Chroma and get his Vex Armor, an Elemental Ward, and then play as Loki for the remainder of, I guess the buffs would probably last, I don't know, another 40 seconds. And like, that's, again, that sounds really broken. And that's because it kind of is, right? Again, you have to keep in mind that his Perfect Illusions, they can't do anything with Archon Shards. They only get 4 mod slots. So like, it sounds very broken, and it is, but I don't think it's as game breaking as like you would think. Again, I could be totally wrong here, but also DE is not exactly opposed to game breaking, and I think this is something Loki could potentially deserve. You could also make the base stats for the imperfect clones or imperfect illusions lower. Like, so normally your ability duration base, or your ability everything base is 100, maybe make it 75, right? That way mods have less impact. I don't know. There is a way to balance this. I refuse to believe there isn't. But yeah, basically Loki's ultimate would be the ability to swap between 3 different equipped Warframes, use their abilities, and then leave the Warframe after X amount of time and keep those buffs or debuffs, whether you're summoning like Caliban's friends or using a Nyx mind control, and there's all sorts of things you could do. I haven't even thought them all through because, of course, I don't get paid to do this. So for me, obviously, this is very much, again, a proof of concept. And I think this concept is absolutely provable. I think this is something that could be really cool and come out in a balanced form. Would it be a pain in the ass to code? Yeah, probably. But, Spaghetti Code never stopped this company, so whatever. But yeah, that about wraps it up. I think this was a very cohesive experience. I try to make it not too fast. I'm going to be including the usual drawn diagrams and text support, but writing these reworks as someone with no coding experience, little coding experience, it's kind of rough. So yeah, that's it. What do you think? Is this like total ass? Is this beyond redemption? Does this just need some small adjustments? Is it absolute peak? Loki players are very passionate, I know. Let me know in the comments, right? I know that obviously this frame has a lot of baggage with him. So I got a little spooked out about making a rework, but I think this is something that has a lot of potential. Having his kit more around like finishers and dealing damage with daggers, something that is unexplored, the ability to create clones of Warframes and create a kit that is super unique and allows you to take so many different directions, letting the frame who's done nothing and rotted for so long do not everything, but anything he could possibly want, right? All sorts of innovative ways to play the game. I think that's the way that the Loki Master Race wants to play. So hopefully this was something you found unique, innovative, and at least entertaining. And leave your thoughts in the comment. Again, this video, it's always open for discussion. That's kind of why I'm here. If you don't comment, it's like, well, I don't know what more to do. Reworks are something unique that I do that I want to make more of. So this is obviously one of the more daunting ones, especially in regards to his ultimate. So hopefully you guys enjoyed. So much love. Thanks for the subs. Don't forget to sub, like, all the blah. Thank you for the support. Love you guys to death. And I'll see you next Friday. Take care.